Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto What If Hub 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got a New Life? The Ultimate Multiverse Family. Part 2. Kakuzu. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. At least, that was the proverb that first came to mind. Kakuzu didn't know if that was the most appropriate proverb, but he supposed someone had to begin things. Since they were doing nothing but waiting around for other people, he might as well. He heard a door close squeakily some distance away, then Hidan came speeding around the corner into view. The time elapsed in between seemed insufficient. He wondered if Hidan was on coffee time. But no, there was no caffeine involved. Hidan was simply that excited to be exploring an abandoned building. The younger man had already stated his disappointment that it wasn't haunted when they entered, but his mood had recovered and ever since he'd been exploring all the rooms. In fact, Hidan had already claimed dibs on one of the ground floor rooms that was carpeted and had a window facing in the right direction to receive the afternoon sun. He'd also begun to contemplate the virtues of some of the beds on the upper floor, but Kakuzu cut him off out of complete disinterest in the best places to have. What he was much more interested in was the content of Hidan's musings. He'd thought at the beginning that Hidan had an unusually strong sense of direction for a boy. Later, he'd thought that Hidan had an unusually weak sense of direction for a man. There was nothing immediately obvious to disprove that conclusion. When asked about life plans, the younger man never had one. The direction he did show was probably pillaged off other people that felt they should make something of their lives. He seemed to swing wildly, as if on a string, not coming from anywhere and not going anywhere except by accident. Kakuzu wasn't one to take things on faith, ordinarily. Despite this, he recalled the feeling of pity fading slowly until recently, only a few months ago, he'd realized that there was no pity left. He no longer felt any such thing about his companion, no longer thought it was sad how Hidan's non-existent past and uncertain future almost certainly coincided to leave him nothing more than a mirror without even any framing of its own. It was just as well that Hidan had developed a strong sense of discretion from being privy to others' secret feelings. Kakuzu couldn't have discussed what he now felt anyway. With no obvious reasons to think any such thing, he now sensed Hidan's existence was empty only in the way a black hole was. The world slid toward him, and he slid toward it. Now, Kakuzu thought perhaps Hidan did not need a sense of direction. He thought he had some idea how the protagonists of fantasy stories felt when they stepped through a mirror to discover a world beyond. The feeling he could not describe was of deepening, of something deepening right beneath his feet. Hidan was not other people's reflections. There was something that he alone was, something which had Kakuzu a little freaked out. He would follow and see what Hidan was up to this time, simply because whatever Hidan was had ordained it. A long time ago, a little white-haired boy's smile at discovering Kakuzu when even he wasn't sure where he was had inspired the thought that that would be the rest of his life. In that interest, Kakuzu patiently listened now to Hidan describing with the same boundless cheer the virtues of other parts of the building he'd explored. The basement, rather austere looking, from the sound of it. Hidan suggested in one of his cryptic offhand comments that it might be good for Conan. The roof, God alone knew how he got up there, but he'd found a corner that would be nice to sit in, if one liked sitting in a part of the roof whose outer structure had broken off. One of the rooms on the upper floor was a double. Birds used the back stoop quite often according to the amount of bird poop layered there. There was a garage around the side of the building, and among other things it had a jug of antifreeze on a shelf. There was also a little shed with access to the parking lot, not big enough to fit a car but perhaps a smaller vehicle. All this was announced rapidly, in about a minute, with Hidan counting off the items on his fingers. Now he paused, his counting finger moving on to the next and hovering there as if he'd forgotten what the 7th item on the list was. Hidan tapped his counting finger up and down slowly. Something else too, something important. Hidan. What is it, Kakuzu? While we're waiting, I thought it was a good time to apologize. For what? We're cool. Quote dot dot dot. I want to anyway. It defeats the purpose to handwave things away like that. Okay. What'd want to apologize for? At that moment, the door burst open. Not loudly, but they'd been focused enough not to have noticed the sound of a car driving up, so it was startling anyway. A familiar smell reached Hidan's nose as he poked his head out of the kitchen and ran down to the front lobby. Kakuzu followed. Dudes. Hey Kakuzu, Fish Face and Band Boy are here. Kakuzu put his hand over his ear and winced. I'm right here, no need to yell. Kisame muttered, same, then turned to Hidan and requested no nicknames for the rest of the evening. Such a request was enough to make Hidan completely quiet as he pondered what to call them aside from the nicknames he had for them. While he did so, Kakuzu turned and told the new arrivals of his encounter with the odd-looking woman who had invited them all here and his suspicions. Kisame nodded at the end of his explanation and said, yeah, me too. Is it just me, or have things been weird enough lately? I did not need to find someone like her waiting for me on top of everything. Itachi wondered what his friend meant by that, but asked nothing. Sometimes tension needs to reach a critical point before it releases. I think she is that point. What tension? Asked Kakuzu, who was used to greater oddness and had overlooked the many smaller oddnesses he'd noticed over the past few months. And what do you mean by that? Itachi explained. From what you've said, it sounds like she was relying on persuading Hidan to get you here, so she didn't have to tell you anything about what she wants. I have not heard what she said to convince Kisame, but when she came to me she had to reveal some of her plan to bring me on board. What she said to me was that she knew I was seeking answers, and promised that she could tell me what she knows of them and help me find out more. She implied that she was very involved in the current situation in the process. As for bringing us here, she stated that the answers I want to know would be so unbelievable that she could not hope to convince me alone. Her plan is to create a sort of domino effect so we can convince each other of whatever it is she wants us to know. It seems that Hidan is to be the linchpin. I decided to allow her to do this after she promised that what she wants us to believe are the exact answers to the questions I've been wondering about. Kisame stared. The questions? You mean, the weird things? She wants to tell us all about those. Itachi stared back. Yes. I didn't think you would have. When did you notice, Kisame? What the hell is going on here? What is she involved in? And why are you two talking like a bunch of psych cases? Hidan reached out and patted Kakuzu on the upper arm gently, as if he was consoling a peer over heartbreak. Relax, Kakuzu. And also open your eyes and take a look around. Shark Boy's a shark, and he's got a friend who is a shark but also definitely not one. Doesn't feel like any normal shark I've ever met. You've got like a million different stitches all over the place. Where the hell did those come from? And don't tell me that bullshit about getting all cut up from a tractor accident when you were in high school. That's bullshit. Your stitches are lovely looking fresh ones, not nasty old scar tissue. Hidan turned to the other two and placed a hand over his chest to indicate himself. Why yes, I did notice. You can close your mouths now. Say, did any of you guys get the feeling that she knew you already? I don't remember meeting her before, but we were not strangers. Or at least I wasn't. I thought she might be like a goddess or something, someone who has the power to know you without you knowing it. He looked sideways at Kisame, who was still staring coldly. I'll think of something else to call you later, gill face. Just wanted to help Kakuzu here, so go off yourself. Kisame put his priorities in order post-haste, and decided the nicknames weren't high enough on the list. That question was, though. Well, she did stand a little close, and she didn't look at me like I was a new sight either. I don't happen to believe in goddesses, so I'm thinking that sounds rather stalkery. He moved closer to Itachi and lowered his voice. You absolutely sure this is a good position to be in? She promised me the same thing, answers to just what the hell is going on here, but she didn't mention the part about invoking herd mentality. That's what anyone who wants a lot of people to do something stupid does. I'm not comfortable being a flock member. I want the right to get the hell out of here if she sounds like she's losing her mind. I already gave her tips on how to be less creepy. I don't have any more benefit of the doubt to give. Hidan piped up. She's not losing her mind. I would have noticed it if I'd felt all unbalanced and shit as soon as she walked up. I didn't. You, balanced. I could see a lot of things that would fly under the radar using you as a standard. Kakuzu sniffed. Not to mention, he's in love. She's apparently so amazing, he just couldn't help it. I saw the hearts in his eyes myself. Hidan turned red and punched Kakuzu in the shoulder ineffectually. I am not in love with her. I remember that, and I remember her looking really cool, and it wasn't. The silence pulled everyone's eyes towards Hidan, who appeared to have run out of ranting mid-sentence. He now studied the floor somewhere to his right with a focused expression. As the seconds dragged on, he put his hand over his chest and muttered almost under his breath, "Conan." Then he looked down at his hand as if paying attention to his heartbeat, and finally took it away from his chest and put it on his chin in a thinker's pose. After a second or two, he came back to the space and time he currently occupied and looked at Kakuzu, who was very intrigued. I am not in love with her. Kakuzu embraced the intrigue. This is better than any puzzle I have ever found, almost better than a good book. I knew there had to be a reason I keep him around. His eyes widened as he became the first to figure out what was meant. But, you were. Itachi considered Hidan's perception, and his eyes widened too as the difference between past and present became obvious. In other words, you only felt like you were in love when you were around her. Kisame was confused until Itachi said that, at which point he understood. His face paled. So that means it was her that. Yeah. Hidan raised a hand to his face and flicked himself on the nose as if to give himself a mild punishment for being a moron. When she stood up to leave, I felt like touching and I realized that feeling came from her. How the did I not see this? Kakuzu put a hand on his shoulder. It's just as well I decided to apologize then. I was going to say I was sorry for making fun of you. I was just in a mood to tease. Looks like I have extra to apologize for now. Hidan smirked. Ah, thanks. That's sweet to say, even if we were already 100% cool. He then stuck his tongue out at Kisame, who was still shocked at this revelation. That settles it, asshole. Definitely a goddess. Itachi was as curious as Kakuzu now. Sadly, she requested the locations of some others, so I sent her on to Sasori and the Celestial Twins. Sasori alone could take her a while, if she can convince him at all. We'll have to wait. Kisame had recovered from his shock and found, to his surprise, that he was now disappointed at having to wait for Conan to come back. Well, at least I have something to wait for now. This settles nothing. There's still no proof she came from fluffy, sunshiny heaven as opposed to being a regular old stalker. I reserve the right to think the worst. Sunshine. Hidan immediately put his fingers back into order and counted off the seventh thing. That's it. I found this room that's not usable for much, except that it has gigantic windows to let in all the sun. Put some fluffy carpeting down, move in a comfy chair. He started purring with his hands curled next to his cheeks and moved next to Kakuzu to rub against his shoulder in perfect bliss. Since when is he a fluffy little housecat? Well, I suppose it does no harm. Kisame was fascinated in a repulsed way by this, but he shook himself out of his trance and returned to his priorities. Itachi, why have you been avoiding and acting odd around me lately? I'm sorry. I was looking into the oddities, I didn't know you knew. End of intermission. Nagato. In the dark, the light shining from the moth's wings dazzled his eyes like the light of a revolving star. It poured through the air, as liquid as the scents from the flowers, and though he didn't know it, he was smiling. Beauty and beauty together, and not the fading type, either. The thought is this what people mean by mystical. Waited patiently for the moment to end, at least in theory. As far as mystical could describe the feeling that everything inside his body no longer had any weight, just as if the light outside could pour through his eyes and settle inside, it was probably accurate. If it could convey the sense of rightness that allowed him to drift, helplessly like a feather on a river, toward the beauty he was drawn to with no obstacle at all to stop him, then it was probably accurate. Nagato felt nothing, no fear or doubt, just sheer desire to drown himself in that light as a celestial body desires to fall into its star. Gravity defied itself as the moth simply floated back into the air again, hardly seeming to move its wings. Slowly it hovered, then with a ripple abruptly broke out of the moment and flapped its wings to trace a path upward. That ripple Nagato swore he could see in reality told him the bubble was about to burst, the moment about to end. He redoubled his efforts, but alas, a thing that is only carried by a current cannot speed its journey. He was almost there, just about to reach it, when... Wow! Nagato stopped moving. His face hovered only centimeters from its resting spot, but he remembered what he had forgotten in the moment with the moth, that the distance really was infinite. He had his own motion. He would never be able to fall into his star. Slowly, holding back both his breath and the tears slipping out to fog over his eyes, he slid backward so as not to draw attention. When he had regained a normal seated position still facing his friend, he sighed in relief. Thank goodness, he had not upset the world with his actions after all. Yahiko had not closed his mouth after his previous exclamation of wonder, and still sat tracing the moth's flight, completely unaware of any potential to be upset. He watched the moths fluttering about in their dance, and wondered if they knew how they were. He smiled gently, a smile that Nagato believed could make anyone who saw it gentle too, and turned to share the sight with his friend. When their eyes met, they both were smiling. Yahiko smiled wider still at seeing Nagato apparently so moved that there were tears in his eyes. He laughed, and gestured for Nagato to look up with him. It tickles a little when they do that, but a good kind of tickling. Kind of like, well, you ever held a caterpillar on your finger and watched it? Kind of like that, except, their wings. The light shining through them is different somehow, more fuzzy. It's like moonlight. A little. Kind of different, actually, but not very much. The whole thing is just really great. I mean, Yahiko made several motions with his hands as he spoke, reaching out and closing his fists as if he could grab the words he needed out of the air. His face flushed bright red as they refused to come. They're just so small and fuzzy, and the light's so nice and all of it's brightly lit. It's just right. I'm sorry. Nagato poked him in the shoulder. Don't be sorry. I love trying to talk about things like this, actually. Let's see. It tickles very delicately when they do that, like the very edge of a very soft feather. The light shining through their wings is, that one's really hard to talk about without seeing it, but maybe it's a little like when you see light shining through the water. When you see light like that, and it's so smooth and kind of gentle. The moths are delicate and beautiful, and the light is delicate and beautiful, and the whole thing is just like a moment angels might have pictured on postcards in heaven, with no darkness intruding anywhere. Does that sound close? Yahiko slumped backwards over the bench. Things just sound so good when you talk about them. I'd love to help other people feel good with my words like that. How do you do it? He sighed and lifted his arms off the bench, allowing them to fall with exaggerated emphasis and sprawling in a full-body pout. Nagato tried not to giggle, but ended up shaking slightly while smiling, which was a dead giveaway so he needn't have bothered. Yahiko turned his head, and managed to keep a very slight pout on his face for only a few seconds before it morphed into a smile, then a full grin. Well, the part about what it felt like was a little off. It wasn't quite like that, he said as the smile was turning into a grin. Then they were both laughing. While still convulsing, Yahiko pushed himself upright and got the last of it out. Still grinning, he turned to ask Nagato, who was still giggling, wait a sec, do angels really have postcards in heaven? I've never heard of that, but it would actually be so appropriate if they did. I hope at least some of them send mail to the demons. Imagine if you were just there, and everything was all dark and fiery, and then you get a postcard addressed just to you with a snowflake on it or something. That'd be exactly the sort of thing an angel would do, wouldn't it? Nagato held his hands in his lap to keep them from reaching out and screwing everything up. You'd know what angels do better than I would. Yahiko tilted his head. What do you mean by that? Nagato realized then what he'd said and turned away to hide his slight blush. How to fix this? Oh, I didn't mean. I just meant that you, actually that angels are, quite simple beings. They spend their whole lives in the good parts of the afterlife and never even get tempted by anything. They just know what's good and what's not, like they're made of goodness. I have been confused, doubted, stolen pieces of candy from my parents, wondered how I would perform the perfect murder if I had a reason to murder someone, stuff like that. I know that's all pretty normal, but it's only normal for people not angels. You just seem to be a lot simpler than I am, have an easier time knowing what things are, that's all. More angelic than me. Yahiko relaxed at this. Simplicity is overrated. Maybe, but there has to be a reason it's rated in the first place. There has to be someone around who knows what they're doing. That makes sense. Yahiko paused. Just, maybe, don't phrase it like calling me an angel. I don't get offended or anything, and it's not like I mind girly things, but I just can't help but think it sounds like flirting whenever I hear a guy talking about someone looking like an angel. I don't mind very much, it just feels kind of weird. That's okay, right? Nagato was almost as red as his hair by this point. Yeah, I get it. That was an awkward way of putting it. I didn't mean that you look as beautiful as an angel or anything like that, it just came out wrong. Is this lying? I didn't mean to sound like I was flirting with you or anything. Oh sewer, I didn't. I won't say things like that again. Why did I even say that in the first place? Yahiko waved his hand as if to deflect flies buzzing around his head. It's okay. I didn't think anything like that, no awkwardness here. He then considered for a couple seconds. Although, slipping in a phrase like that so easily could be a great skill if you were flirting. How do you not have a girlfriend? Danger approaching in 3, 2, how don't you? Yahiko's smile fell. I don't know. Can we not talk about that? Much better. Oh man, I can't believe I just did that to him. Was that the only thing I could have said? Oh, sorry. Is it a big deal? Yahiko looked unhappy for the first time in a long while. Nagato wanted to smack himself for making his best friend feel like that, but now there was nothing he could do. He could only listen as Yahiko muttered in a low voice, I'm not sure if it should be. I have no idea why romance should be important to me, I know I have a whole life of other things to be happy for, but yeah. It is a big deal. I'm sorry for being such a bummer. He twitched his lips into a smile again and said, with more cheer injected into his voice, well, that's enough moping for tonight. I just hope things are going better for you in that department. Kill me now. Suddenly there was a tremendous noise from the bushes behind them. Both of them jumped. Wait. No, I didn't mean that literally. The noise stopped just as they both turned to look around. Yahiko turned to look in the other direction just as Nagato's eyes focused on a moving shadow. He froze and said nothing as it swiftly came out from the path behind them that led into the woods. It seemed human. Yahiko turned around and his mouth fell open a little. The shadow entered the light as soon as it stepped out of the trees, and quickly resolved itself into the figure of a woman. Illuminated, she didn't look very different. The only changes the light made to her appearance were revealing the color of her hair and some cloud shapes on her otherwise shadowy black cloak, and making visible the flower in her hair. It also highlighted how pale she was on the very few patches of exposed skin they could see. There was silence as she stopped, still facing out in front of them. Yahiko thought. He couldn't be sure since there were other reasons for his heart to be pounding at the time, but he thought, she was kind of pretty. Nagato turned again the same color as his hair, even as the voices of an angelic choir sung in his head. On the one hand, she saved me. I have so many thanks to give, but none I can express, definitely not in front of him. How can I express my gratitude for this most timely intervention? On the other hand, was that deliberate? Did she really know when to do that to help me? How long has she been listening to us? Please don't tell him, please don't tell him, please don't. His train of thought derailed on a dime as his eyes glanced over her hands while looking down. Her fingers were tensed. Not tensed and curled, ready for action, but tensed and uncurled as if to stop herself from reaching out, stop herself from showing too much. Some of that may have been projection. Nonetheless, concern bubbled up from its ever uncapped fountain, and Nagato looked up to see what he could of her face. He could see almost nothing. Between her high collar and her posture, still facing away and not looking at them, nothing expressive was visible except the tilt of her head. She was looking down. Her shoulders seemed tense. Her breathing was very even and slow, too much so. None of this was of a very obvious nature, but Nagato knew well the attempt to avoid looking at someone out of pain. Is she possibly like me? Her fingers relaxed. In a blink all these indications disappeared, forcibly dragged under the surface as if by an omnipresent Cthulhu or a living ocean. Her steps were perhaps a bit slow, but there was no obvious hesitation as she turned to face them. Only one thing remained, and that was the fact that she still refused to look at them. Without a direct view into them, Nagato could not read her eyes. He could not be completely sure there was anything in them to read. Yet just now he had seen. I have a completely ridiculous proposal for you two, she said, shooting the words out as if they might be poisonous. Nagato blinked, then instinctively turned to Yahiko. Yahiko turned to him. After sharing some invisible communication that neither of them had the slightest clue what was going on, Nagato resolved to trust his instincts. He had seen what he had seen. That feeling of concern still remained. He turned back to face her and asked, more completely ridiculous or less? Something changed in her expression, but neither of them could see what or even where in her expression it had happened. She made a direct movement, no distractions, under her cloak and retrieved a piece of paper. She handed it to Nagato. I do not know, but regardless it is a group ridiculous proposal. Go there. Others are already waiting. Nagato took the paper, glanced at it to see an address of some kind, and passed it to Yahiko without reading a letter. While the orange-haired sunbeam dedicated himself to studying it in greater detail, Nagato looked up at the lady. What are we doing? He started when she looked back at him. He had not been hallucinating after all, there was pain in her eyes. In addition to pain, he could see a kind of distance in her eyes that reminded him only of loss. But then her eyes softened and became tinged with gentleness, just slightly. She mouthed words to him silently. His ears were convinced by his eyes that they heard, "You're welcome," clear as day. Then with non-negligible effort her eyes jerked away, and the 3 seconds they had enjoyed together were over. Yahiko looked up from the paper and handed it back. She took it, placed it right back under her cloak where it had come from, said, "Thank you," at the exact same time as he opened his mouth to ask something, and turned away just a touch quicker than she had originally turned to them. She stood there for a fraction of a second, during which Nagato saw her hand flutter and fingers tense in response, then began to walk. With quick steps she returned to the darkness once more. Yahiko wondered if he'd only imagined seeing her fast walk become a run just before she disappeared. The night was quiet. Nagato could still see the look in her eyes. He turned to Yahiko with a strength in his posture, no longer relaxed, and asked in a tone that was mild yet not to be argued against, "You got the address?" Yeah, we're going." Yahiko looked curious and felt bewildered. Not at the declaration, he was more than willing, but at the tone it was in. Nagato looked sure, a kind of surety from somewhere deep inside. Yahiko felt his eyes tearing up, and realized he was happy. It was good to have someone else with a strong direction. He understood much better what Nagato had meant. Just seeing this look in his friend's eye made him smile. Nagato smiled back and took Yahiko's hand, pulling him to his feet. With a tug he got them moving in the direction she had left. Yahiko turned back and waved at the moths, fluttering up and down according to the currents of the liquid air, several of them having left at some point to pursue the ambrosiac scent. He smiled at them gently and said, "Bye. Have fun, you guys." Nagato squeezed his hand and tugged again, then let go. They walked forward into the darkness in harmony, Yahiko just behind. Conan. How could he be here? I thought whatever this is was too recent. What is it? What is it that is torturing me with these reminders of the people I've loved? Yahiko had not been wrong. At the very edge of the fading light, the feeling of his gaze had become too much to bear. She could only hope the light had not reflected off any of the tears currently escaping from her eyes. It was just so many things. What is this? Is it hell or is it heaven? Shouldn't I be glad he's here? He's just as I remember from so long ago. He's just as I perceived him then. It seems I am still human, after all. If I can help him remember, it can return. She shook her head, tears still dripping down to the pavement. No, the past can never return. Not even here, in this place. Even if he did remember, Nagato and I have changed too much. We'd be like a puzzle whose pieces have changed and no longer fit Togoth. No. Just where the hell am I? There was no answer. The emptiness of the night whispered to her in a language of more emptiness. It was almost tangible, and Conan felt herself evaporate, as if everything she was leaving her and becoming nothing. Without realizing it, she suddenly found her head lolled to the side and her knees halfway sunk to the pavement. She gave in, and it was quiet. Her tears dried. Did Toby make it happen? Did he make his world of illusions? The nothing felt so, something. Her senses told her she was being watched from every direction, including inside. Her skin crawled with senses nothing like sight, yet it was the only comparable sense. Her eyes still stung, even after the tears had stopped, and it crept down. The stinging crept down those same lines in her face it had crept up from, flashing into a stabbing feeling at the top of her spine as if she had been struck by lightning. Down it swept, flashing at each vertebra and reaching outward from her, into the nothing. But how? No time. It kept going, tracing every line of her being. Joining the nothing and the pain came a curious feeling. It was heat. The lightning feeling of being stabbed flared, and took on the heat of the sun. Conan tried to scream, no longer attempted to stop herself. But then she discovered something infinitely worse, which was that she could not scream. In desperation she reached inside, trying to strangle whatever it was that was watching, but it turned out to be nothing. A flower burst open inside her much too abruptly, spraying lava everywhere. It touched petals to her skin, and that was when she recovered the ability to feel her skin again. Conan's eyes flew open, and she saw a star. It was ordinary. It was the same star she'd just barely seen through her tears. She looked down. She was standing with spots of darkened pavement at her feet, leaning against a wall. Her face was covered with tears, which continued dripping. Her head was upright. She experimentally pronounced, "Huh," and realized her vocal cords were now working. Had they ever been not working? Was it a highly compressed hallucination? No, of course not. That would fly in the face of the list of unspoken things one agrees to by becoming a ninja, that she'd begun composing sometime into her training with Jiraiya sensei. One of the entries on there was, "Ninjas give up the right to disbelieve anything." If something ridiculous existed or was rumored to exist, Conan had begun to figure out that it probably did exist around the time Jiraiya sensei had started teaching them how to walk on water. Nothing in her career since contradicted that, so it was actually quite weird that she would even consider dismissing it as a hallucination. She dismissed that as a side effect of the general skepticism all ninjas were supposed to regard everything with. Then what? The reality of such an experience almost makes me feel the urge to scream again. An illusion perhaps. That was a lie. She knew it was one and still thought it, making it a double lie. The pain and everything else had felt so real, it could not be an illusion. And not all of the things she had felt were gone. Even now, she could feel a nothing in everything she touched, as if they were just illusions and the truly important material lay beneath, where she could not feel it. Silence is deafening. So true. It had somehow felt infinitely more real than anything materially existing she touched. She flinched at the mere thought of the I word. Toby could never think of anything like that. He could never handle it. No matter what he claims, he's not real divinity. What the hell was? Her body temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and instead of think any more about anything, she plucked the paper flower out of her hair. What reflex led her to do that could not be verified. Regardless, she stared at her flower. Normally its small paper petals were tightened around each other, as closed as it could be while still being a flower, but she continued to stare with open mouth. Each petal now was more open. Not much more, but somehow they didn't look like paper anymore. She could almost feel a readiness to spring out and finish their unfurling, the petals lengthening to their full length, exposing the core. It was a very sinister flower. She shoved it back in place before it could scare her out of her wits for a real length of time. Please let me feel alone again. The feeling of something looking at her from everywhere also remained, and passively did not fade. Is this meant to be comforting? The nothingness was exactly that, nothing, so she figured the answer was technically no. What the hell am I even doing, trying to argue with the universe? Or am I trying to argue with myself? Which is what? She no longer believed she was recognizable even to Nagato, who was only a few months gone. The tears began again, but a strange sense of comfort kept her upright. Her legs vaguely remembered the directions to Sasori, and without noticing she began to walk, stepping over her tears that were beginning to dry on the pavement. Sasori. It was very dark. Too dark. It was probably a bad idea to be working this late. Fortunately, it was a Friday, so the next day would be perfectly available to catch up on sleep. Sasori was well aware that wasn't how sleep worked, and there would probably be some disturbance to his sleep schedule for the next few days, if he was able to successfully sleep in. Regardless, work was a good place to be. He wondered at the convenience of his schedule. Was it lucky that he had superiors who would allow him to work this late, or was he just a victim of shady practices who just happened to be perfectly adapted to the demands? If so, should he bother protesting? In what fashion? With the next few twists, those questions settled down to the back of his mind, drifting to a neat orderly place. That place was, maybe I'll think about that after I've earned enough money from this place to afford professional help. The idealists he knew would be disappointed, but some things were more important than standing against shady business practices. A few more twists. Then a switch to a smaller, more precise tool. Get everything aligned correctly. Some delicate taps. A few not so delicate thumps with his hand to see how it sounded. It sounded good. Well, alright then. Sasori stood up and put his things away, slowly. The faint smell of oil lingered in the air. He didn't like that smell. Even so, this was a good place to be. A very nice, methodical place. Each tool went in its own space in his kit. He wished whatever it was Deidara was troubled by could be positioned so neatly. Even after putting every wrench and screw away, he lingered. The oil smell surrounded him, the smell of a car's bleeding, dirty guts. He wondered if Deidara would understand this smell, suddenly realized that perhaps there could be a parallel between their experiences. Of course, it would probably be a bad idea to bring that up. It might make things worse. He should minimize his risks, mention it offhand on a good day. Sigh, when did it become like this, me looking after and watching my step around a kid like him? Sasori figured the closest he had to an answer was the day Deidara had come back. But even then, he'd shrugged things off at first. There was no clear way to mark the time since. Somehow, he hadn't been paying attention. Somehow, he hadn't been marking the time as people trapped in unpleasant situations often do. Somehow, he still wasn't. It wouldn't have been correct to say he was trapped. He didn't see Dei all that often even now, wasn't like he lived with the kid. It would have been easy enough to just stop showing up, stop bringing him the occasional gift, stop making little things in his spare time for Dei to hang up. Easy enough in practice. In theory it was much harder. What else would he do in his spare time? It wasn't like there was anybody else to enjoy seeing him. I wonder how Granny's doing. He decided to stop by and stay for a while tonight. To hell with proper sleep schedules. With quick, precise motions, Sasori turned all around the smallish room he had to work in, switching off and shutting down machinery, putting things back in every drawer, and finally switching off the lights. As he did this last thing, his hand lingered over the last switch for a moment before switching it off. It stayed there afterwards, lingering on the dirty plastic cover for a few seconds before slowly dropping to his side. Sasori didn't understand this sudden hesitation, but he was well aware that everything had a cause, however remote. Therefore he must have perceived something which caused him to hesitate. He narrowed his eyes in the near-complete darkness to shut out the last little bit of light, and questioned himself. Is this going to be bothersome? Then he pictured in his mind's eye the well-practiced journey to the door and beyond, and heard a quiet sigh escape. The thought of beginning that journey met with resistance in his body and mind. Seems this is going to be bothersome indeed. Steeling himself for whatever was set to interrupt his day, Sasori wondered why. People only needed to steel themselves for unpleasant things, usually. As unpleasant as the idea was, Sasori knew full well his days were overdue for some interruption. Sadly, logic could not override the lazy part of himself, so stealing continued to be necessary. He walked in his usual circuit through the darkness in no hurry, gathering his thin jacket, walking over to the desk in the back to collect his keys, finishing off his mug of coffee. It was almost zen-like. Then he completed the circuit at the door, and, taking one last look through the darkness for reasons he could not have named, stepped outside. The first breath of fresh air caused his throat to spasm in an effort to keep from gagging as the clean air reminded his nasal receptors of what air was supposed to smell like. Several quick exhales later, the vaporized oil particles were mostly cleared out of his system and he could enjoy the air without distraction. For some seconds, his eyes peered out at the darkness and unobtrusively scanned side to side, his expression never changing. Sasori saw nothing. Still he stood motionless, turning his head slowly and continuing to look around unhurriedly. He did this despite thinking the odds were low he would be able to see anything since he did not have any special night vision, and he was proven right. He saw nothing. The first sense to tell him anything new about his environment was his sense of smell, as soon as the wind changed to flow towards him from the side instead of his front. From somewhere in front and over to the right, he smelled something that did not belong anywhere near his workplace. The first thing he considered was that those two guys he sometimes saw in the park might have stopped by, but that was unlikely since they did not talk to him much and they did not seem to be the sort of people who would literally stand in the bushes, which was what a person would have to do for the scent of the park flowers to rub off on them. That ended up being the only thing he considered, since he had no other ideas. So he stared into the little light there was in that direction and waited. After several slow, meditative breaths, Sasori found something to focus his eyes on at last, a white thing that caught the little moonlight. He couldn't have said what it was, but from its position his eyes instinctively moved down to look at the rest of the shape he knew should be beneath it. Some white outlines appeared as if in thin air, cloud shapes surrounding patches that seemed just a smudge lighter. As the human shape before him stepped out from under the trees, Sasori saw that this was because they were red and everything outside the patches black. His eyes naturally moved up to look at the shadowed face of the person before him. He saw nothing. He was not disturbed by this, because although he was facing into the moonlight he knew they must also be unable to see anything in his face. Public displays of emotion had never been his thing. Sasori, the person said, revealing themselves to be a woman. Nothing he could control showed on his face as Sasori instantly settled into a defensive mood. He realized he was readying for her to say it just a split second before she spoke. I would like to offer something to you and Deidara. Deidara? How much did she know? His eyes narrowed slightly, as much as he allowed them to. Something about this situation seemed off. What was it? He attempted to gain some control over the encounter. What do you have to offer? She hesitated, as if unprepared. He would have expected her to approach with something planned, in these circumstances, at this time. He wasn't sure how to take her defiance of this. After only a moment she did speak, forcing him to reassess how prepared she was. An opportunity. Something different. It will change a great many things for the both of you. I ask only that you listen. Who are you? Someone who has been subtracted from your lives, I suppose. But somehow you have not been from mine. I know you, in a fashion, and Didera as well. I'm amazed to find him living on his own. I would not have expected him to fit in this world. Do you know where Didera lives? No. Out of respect, I shall leave up to you the decision to involve him or not. All I will say is that it would be better if you did bring him. Bring him. Didara's presence would make my goal more complete. I've already asked others to listen to my request at a location not too far from here. Just then Sasori realized what had bugged him about this encounter from the beginning. It was the way she stood. Looking at her, hearing her, it was quite obvious. Was she ex-military, current military, paramilitary? What did she intend to do with Didera? Complete. The others I ask you to meet are in the same position as you are. You do not know what the position is, and I'll explain if you decide to come. By you, I mean you and Didera. Although, I'm sure he is very aware that he is in an unnatural position. It would not be in his best interest to deny him the chance to find out what. Sasori remained still and did not speak after she finished, his mind whirling. A feeling of unreality gripped him. The vague words, the mysterious woman offering answers to questions he didn't yet know he should be asking, military involvement, I'm in a mystery novel. He searched through everything he could think of to disprove that hypothesis. Nothing he could think of conclusively denied it. Only one thing caught his attention, and it didn't exactly promise to prove his world was real. How can anyone be subtracted from someone else's life? How do you know me, and I don't know you? He whispered, dreading the answer already. The woman seemed at a loss for words. She shook her head slowly. That is the position you are in that I want to tell you about, Sasori. I have no idea why you don't know me. I would like to fix that if possible. As for how I know you, that's not exactly the right question. The right question is how I still know you. She seemed to want to say more, but ultimately settled for turning her palms up helplessly. Oh God, I'm in a paranormal mystery novel. I hate those. Actually, he hated mysteries in general. Everything always turned out to be so complicated that the chances of any non-fictional average Joe grasping it all seemed close to nil. Just about everything would require a heroic sacrifice of their health or sanity, and reading one of those things always made him feel fascinated in a terribly uncomfortable way, like watching a slow-motion video of some helpless little insect wondering what was going on as a spider's strands wrapped it up slowly, leisurely, completely. To read a mystery was to have one's sense of reality slowly bent, scraped at, transmuted. To read a paranormal mystery was just to take a hammer to your sense of safety while you were at it. Sasori remained silent as well, his hands slowly closing into fists. His face revealed nothing, but unbeknownst to him, the chakra he knew nothing about ran through a person's brain as well as body, connecting to their soul at several points. Because of this, it could be influenced by emotional states. Because chakra permeated all parts of the living and non-living environment, this influence would in turn influence natural chakra flowing outside of a person's body, and if one was trained in the sage arts they could detect the influence of humans in the environment through this. Even if one was not trained in the sage arts, if it was strong enough a change in natural chakra could still be sensed as a vague feeling, like the feeling of being watched. His face showed nothing, but the aura in the air around him closed, folded, and rippled as if threatening to dissolve away entirely. Experienced Junin knew the aura of fear well, even more experienced negotiators and leaders knew the aura of resistance, and those worthy of the title of Kage, Daimyo, or any other commander of great masses of people knew exactly where one became the other. She froze immediately, changing nothing of what they were currently doing and eliciting as little of a reaction from him as possible. She'd practiced with the best. The man she knew as the puppet master eyed her warily. She stayed still and took slow breaths to project an aura of competence, surety, and general reassuringness. As quickly as one reflexively brings up an arm to shield oneself, Sasori darted a hand into his coat pocket and pulled out another of the little rectangles like the one Tsukumo had checked the time with. The little bubble of light that appeared as it turned on and his own hurried tapping at it did much to isolate his aura, and Conan sensed it was now safe. She could no longer influence him. Whether or not that was a good thing, just in case, she reached for the sheet of paper with the address and let it fall from her fingers, address up and landing in his field of vision, just to the side of the glowing rectangle. His eyes twitched to look at it before he pulled them back. Out of habit, she inclined her head toward him and departed swiftly and quietly. Left on his own, Sasori refocused and tapped out a few quick commands before bringing the phone to his ear and waiting for it to sound on the other end. It did so twice before he heard pained mumbling. Conan raced through the trees on her way out of town, moving quieter than seemed possible despite the fact that she ran along the ground. She'd kept them waiting long enough. Several times she was able to refocus for half a minute, perhaps a minute at most, and remind herself that she had to give Sasori time. It occurred to her that it had been a very bad idea to save the one who would be most difficult to convince and likely require the most time for last. Well, too late for that now. If she could convince everyone else, that might do even if he wasn't there for tonight's show. Speaking of, much as she wanted to be gentle, Conan was well aware that she was aiming to destroy their whole idea of the world they thought they had always lived in. That could not be gentle, or it would fail. Only something concrete would do. Something as hard as concrete, as undeniable, as absolutely wrecking in its power. I almost feel bad for them. She turned left on the road that she knew had patchy yellow lines on it, though it was too dark to see them at night. The beginning had been planned all along by some part of her she didn't interfere with and readily came to her mind as soon as she called for it. However, nothing else was in place. A devastating blow, then what? What would she say? No, the question was not what she would say. She only meant to tell them the truth, after all. The question was, how would she say it? The ordering of the several things she had to tell them, the phrasing, how to respond to inevitable disbelief, all were the things she would need to know. Her heart beat faster as she neared the building. It seemed to beat only one word, a word she definitely did not want to hear. A plan could be restructured, even one for which there would be no second chance like this one. At the very least, if she had a plan and it failed, she could look at the plan, see where it failed, and add it to her collection of experience. The word that she could not help thinking of required something else, a display of herself in her entirety. If it failed, her entire collection of experience and everything she was would fail as well. Her palms sweated. She dried them on her cloak as she slowed to a walk and tried to become more assured. Her heart continued beating away. Improv, 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 improv. Conan strained to keep her face flat as she opened the door. The sound of laughter greeted her as she walked down the hall. You know, if they weren't all assholes, I'd call you a Disney prince. Hidan, I suppose you still could. It doesn't occur to me to think of actual princes from Disney. I thought of the meaning you meant before that one. Does anyone agree? Nagato. I did as well. But isn't it a little undignified? Kakuzu, with a hint of humor on the last word. I am not the guy equivalent of a Disney princess. Yahiko. She could almost hear the blush. A Disney princess is a character type defined by having a strong relationship with animals, to the point of calming normally dangerous ones and being able to command smaller creatures. If you could figure out a way to command these moths, it wouldn't be anything to be embarrassed about. Itachi. Itachi's right, nothing useful can be embarrassing. Next time we meet a large dog, maybe see if you can calm it. That'd be useful and nothing to be embarrassed over, right? Nagato again. The only thing worse than being called a princess is having you guys talking about my feelings. I don't need comforting. Yahiko wasn't taking this well. Although she was only listening from outside the kitchen door, the conversation soothed Conan's nerves. Pulling off the ludicrous through 95% improvisation was a thing to be nervous about. Rescuing Yahiko from awkwardness. Perfectly natural, just as it had been for Nagato. She reached again down to that strange well of confidence, wincing as a memory came up of the momentary glance she'd gotten of the pain and nothingness hiding behind everything. Come to think of it, the strange burning confidence felt just like a lesser version of the burning pain. Well, that made sense, but she pushed her thoughts in that direction away. Consider later. Do now. It felt good. Hey, Conan's back, Hidan yelled, before she'd moved a muscle. What the hell? How? Thankfully her legs were farther away from her ears than her brain was, so they initiated action unaffected by Hidan's exclamation. Conan walked into the room with the counters just in time to witness the strange break in between scenes where everyone rushed to take new places. Yahiko attempted to look nonchalant against the counters in the back. Nagato attempted to join him, but was held back by Hidan's arm slung around his shoulder. With a slight blush he elbowed Hidan in the ribs, causing him to finally realize that his arm was no longer welcome. Kakuzu and Kisame stood together in the near corner to her right, leaning against the wall and cabinets. They moved slightly apart, Kisame drifting closer to Itachi who was sitting on a cabinet as Hidan put on his best offended face and went to sulk next to Kakuzu. They and the gap left between Itachi and Nagato took up the back and right sides, so she moved to the left naturally and smoothly. This instinctive movement reminded her of scattering civilians. They may have the memories of civilians, but they shouldn't have the instincts. Well, at least they may get along better than my old Akatsuki did. They looked at her, each with a different expression. She looked at each of them, wondering. Something was wrong. She considered briefly, then sent a nervous signal that would tell her mouth to open and begin. Just as the signal reached its destination, a sputtering noise from outside interrupted, and they all turned their eyes reflexively to look out the door she'd just come through. Conan almost started at the new sound. It was unlike anything she'd heard yet. The rough sound continued as if something with a very deep voice was coughing very regularly, then stopped. Kisami's mouth dropped open. What the hell did this lady promise him? Itachi was suitably impressed. Kakuzu didn't know the owner of that ride, but he knew who usually came along and groaned inside. He'd been fine for a while, but now he was getting tired and if that brat is loudmouthed tonight I might just choke him to death. Two's a crowd. The sound of two sets of footsteps echoed into the room. Neither set sounded quite right. The reason for that was obvious as Deidara came into view, followed by Sasori. Deidara's footfalls were a little uneven as he rubbed traces of sleepiness out of his eyes still, and he refused to let go of Sasori's arm, leaving his friend to correct his balance with just one. After taking another quick swipe, Deidara blinked to clear his eyes and looked around. Sasori now stood upright and informed Kisame and Itachi with a shake of his head and a motion of his hand that not my idea. See this? I was dragged. Don't blame me for getting caught in this foolishness. Deidara locked eyes with the stiff-backed woman in front of him. She didn't look surprised that he and Sasori were here. The look in her eyes caused him to reflexively adjust his posture. He hadn't seen that look in its entirety for a long time. Deidara realized he was still holding Sasori's arm, and let go apologetically. In the flesh, she looked just like Sasori had described. Deidara didn't know whether to be at attention before her or relaxed. He settled for holding her gaze, even under the weight of her scrutiny. He tried to imitate the look of detached strength before him and failed, miserably. Perhaps he could have managed it before, but not now. Not so many months later. Even then, you have to earn the power to look at someone like that, yeah. I still couldn't, Conan was surprised. She hadn't noticed before, but suddenly all the other Akatsuki members stood out in sharp relief. Of everyone she had seen, Deidara looked the most like the shinobi she was used to seeing. It had to be something in the way he stood, the way he looked. She did not turn her head to look back, but nonetheless could clearly see the others in her mind's eye. relaxed, wary, all kinds of things. But all the things they were, all the ways they had of doing things, all were summed up now in one word. Civilian. Or, perhaps, no, something else was true. She would have immediately seen that. Something else had obscured her vision. Only mostly civilian, then. But how can that be possible? Didera was the lone exception. She recognized his old self in him immediately. Several seconds had passed since he'd looked at her, so with an inner smile Conan broke off the connection and turned her head, implicitly ordering him to the space between Nagato and Itachi. Didera proceeded without dithering, and after looking between them and wondering what had happened Sasori followed. Conan realized at that moment, just before Sasori turned back to lean against a patch of wall, that it was sledgehammer time. Upon turning back, Sasori froze like everyone else already had at the smile she now had on her face. That was not a polite smile. She locked eyes with him. They sparkled maliciously. She locked eyes with Didera. He wondered just how many people she'd sent off to die before. She locked eyes with Hidan. He swooned. Then she raised her hands. Her outer garments exploded, and from them flew paper. The rippling sound briefly reminded some of a crashing wave. Crash it did, sheets of paper flying everywhere around them. A small burst of wind ruffled hair on everyone's head as the sheets of razor-sharp white blinded and surrounded them, forming into a paper blizzard. It was impossible to see where a sheet ended and another began, their borders folded together and blurred with motion. They simply swarmed, their edges making a terrific rustling that blotted out any other sounds there may have been, trapping them far away from the world. No one knew how long this continued before one by one they began to notice a steadily rising noise against the background slicing of the air. It was rhythmic, gentler, the sound of paper against paper. One by one butterflies rose into the air, each rising like a mirage before darting suddenly into their victims. This dart stopped at the last second, and they flapped slowly and leisurely upward again. Some of them accidentally looked at a downward angle during their mindless twisting and saw that much of the seemingly endless paper had settled to the floor and was folding itself in a synchronized rhythm. The blizzard became more complicated in its motion as each sheet of paper was reincarnated with surprising speed into a butterfly that rose to flap its wings in motion around the room. Yahiko was the first to truly take the blow, when a butterfly fluttered softly out of the fracas like a dream. It danced before his uncomprehending gaze before slowly, softly, just barely touching the centerfold of its butterfly body to his nose. His mouth began to work up and down soundlessly, calling in other butterflies to brush their wings against him. By the feel of it several settled in his hair. The first one to brush his ear made him blink and make a sound. It was an incoherent squeak. Hidan was much more coherent when one of the butterflies in front of him made a sudden jerk in just the right way. In a flash his hand lashed out and batted it from the air. It did not fall, but before it could rejoin the swirling chaos it was snatched and held in a loose grip of his fingers. Operating on instinct, he brought it to his face and sniffed it. The blizzard closed in, the butterflies tightening their flight paths until it was impossible not to crash. Crash they did, bouncing off the outer garments, hair, and skin of the people standing in shock until they too began to reach out and interact. As they reached, each and every butterfly was suddenly pulled away from them and drawn up toward the ceiling, till all the blizzard was gathered under the gray tiles. With various exclamations, and one gleeful giggle, all noticed Conan was no longer there in the same space of a moment and a half. Then the blizzard came back down, flooding the room again, except in the few moments they had looked elsewhere each butterfly had unfolded into a plain sheet of paper, not a crease to be seen on any one of them. A whirling cyclone descended then inverted itself, forming into an upside-down funnel wider at the base than at the top with the base several feet off the floor. The paper either ceased to exist or changed color, no one could be sure, until a black shape with red clouds on it appeared in the air. The last few sheets of paper completed the shape by splitting into two streams and being absorbed through the back, briefly creating the illusion of wings being reabsorbed. Then the fluttering sound stopped entirely, and only Conan was left. She hovered in the air, her hands still raised and put together in that sign they had seen before, and gently came back down. Her eyes looked down on them and did not move from their faces. As she spread her legs somewhat and landed gently, her cloak billowed around her. The air was greatly changed. Nobody moved. Hidan threatened to fall down under the force of everyone else's not moving. Some of them moved their mouths, but could not yet say anything. What could be said, after all those ghostly little jarring impacts? Conan smiled sweetly, and undid the seal. A few of them noticed the change in the air around her, but were unable to put a name to what they felt. They'd learn soon enough. Folding her arms across her chest, the kunoichi stepped forward. Some of them flinched back. That was unreal, she said, taking the words right out of their minds. Impossible. It cannot happen in this world. I do not deny it, that was. I broke the rules of this world. But, she smiled, and her eyes flared with triumph, I did not obey the rules of this world in the first place. How could I? It is not my world. She swept her arm out to indicate everything. None of this, not a single particle, belongs to the world I belong to. I am here not of my own decision or will, but because I have died, and whatever may be in charge of our worlds has declared this to be my next one. The world I am from has very different rules. By its rules, I am not unique, and this is perfectly real. The technique I just used was a form of ninjutsu, created by manipulating the chakra inside my body in a specific way, aided by hand seals. That basic principle is common, absurdly so. Unless one has a very rare defect that prevents them from manipulating their chakra, anyone could use hand seals to perform jutsus if they had the chakra and training. That paper jutsu is mine, and mine alone. But there are many others, too many to list the names of even in a very thick book. That's where all of you come in. She swept her gaze across the pale, enraptured faces of the men gathered before her. Have any of you come to wonder over the past few months why it is that everything in you seems unreal? Why somehow, for no reason you can remember, you are fundamentally misaligned with the world around you? Why you have never felt so misaligned before? You may have come up with any number of incorrect ideas, failed to come up with anything at all, or perhaps stumbled upon the correct reason but dismissed it. Regardless, the truth is the same. Just as I am not a person of this world, neither are you. She paused for a moment to let the impact wash over them. Oddly enough, most of them showed no reaction beyond some very subtle changes in the way they looked at her. Sasori looked about to say something, but Deidara's hands involuntarily began to clench within his field of view, so he said nothing. Nagato looked as if he was going to be the first to recover his wits, so Conan moved on. The memories you have of always having belonged here, always having been a person belonging to this world, those are false memories. In reality, the past months you have spent in bewilderment are the only months you have spent in this world. In reality, something led her to pause for a moment there. She tried to continue speaking, but gave up on that effort as useless in a split second. Something was wrong. Something is quite wrong. What is it? What is it that has? Her gaze landed on Sasori, and she clearly saw him for the first time. Under the dim moonlight, she couldn't have been sure. Before, there had been Deidara to look at. But now, the changes to his face were definitely there, not a trick of the moonlight. Eyes a little smaller in proportion, mouth a little bigger, not so round. His hairline was a little higher. He was as tall as Deidara. A dozen little adjustments, adding up to changed. There is change. Difference. Her tongue was released. Thanks to the speed at which a trained strategy planning nin thought, it sounded as if she'd merely paused for effect when she continued, those months are the only months you have spent in existence. I died. Now I am here. I remember. I know all of you. All of you come from the people I knew and worked with, until each of your original selves died. Sasori was first. Kisame, I had not even heard the news of. He must have been most recent. Only force of habit kept her going with the same tone of voice and same facial expression as before. Yet there seems to be some inheritance. It is possible to detect subtle changes in chakra with enough training. I detected such changes from Sasori earlier, which proves that he does have chakra and should be able to use jutsu, even if that is not in accordance with the rules of this world. Some of you have physical features that alone prove this world's rules no longer apply. Each of your personalities is recognizable, even if only on a basic level. Each of your originals had their own unique abilities, techniques they were very skilled in. Those too may have been inherited. That last sentence had almost broken her force of habit, revealed her shock. She could not be certain that assertion was true. If there had been more than one such sentence trickling up to her throat, it might have spelled disaster. We were an organization, the Akatsuki. Perhaps, to find out what has happened, we could be again. The room was dead silent. The stream of words was gone. Conan continued to stare into their faces, but saw nothing. Her own horror fogged her vision. They stared back, their own horror fogging their vision. It was as if a jutsu had been cast to sever the connection between their senses and their mind, rendering almost everyone in the room insensate. There was only one person in the room who was not so crippled, who still had a working sense. Even though this sense detected nothing more than horror and shock, its detection of anything spurred the rest of the mind to activity. Sluggishly, the brain churned out a thought. Everyone feels the same. There is no feeling of not being, like this. So, this thought did more to wake him up than an intravenous line of caffeine. His eyes focused and recognized that her eyes looked kinda withdrawn. Then his eyes glazed over again, because the jolt passed quickly and everyone was kinda withdrawn. Fighting against the paralytics creeping down the line and directly into the wiring of his brain, he managed one last thing. Everyone twitched when the silence was broken. Conan's lower workings of her brain started quickly enough to suppress it, and she hurriedly searched for something to say. Ninjas. Swallowing, she continued. People who can use ninjutsu and keep themselves and others alive in battle are called ninjas. The more formal title is shinobi. A female shinobi is called a kunoichi. The military forces of OU My World are composed of shinobi. As are the truly high-class mercenaries. She shut her mouth before she could say which one they had been. The people I knew wouldn't care. But these, who are they? Sasori was chalk white and struggling to keep from laughing. Oh God, oh sweet baby Jesus, I said it was a paranormal mystery novel. Holy crap, was I too close to normal? This is more like. The urge to laugh subsided as he fell into the serious business of determining exactly which genre they were in. Deidara found himself sucking his thumbs nervously. That was actually quite painful considering the thumb was never supposed to bend that far into the palm. He stopped, flexed his thumbs experimentally. Ow. How long have I been doing this for? Probably ever since she said that thing, actually. Never mind. And started sucking on his first 2 fingers on each hand just to ensure his thumbs wouldn't be disabled if this lady had anything more to say. Kakuzu shook his head slightly, and threw up some emergency denial. What the is this stranger saying? That I've only been alive for a few months. That we're all not real people. How the hell could she know anything of the sort? Kakuzu was not alone in thinking this. Kisame was thinking and doing the exact same thing. Nagato and Yahiko felt certain that they had to be real. How could Jiraiya or their parents' deaths or any of that not be real? And Itachi was blue-screened at the thought that he was dead. Hidan raised his hand. Hey, goddess lady. Her defenses lapsed. Conan replied impulsively. The people of the Rain Village called me their angel, actually. What is it? Hidan remembered the paper wings he'd briefly imagined and filed that away for later. Are you saying we're all ninjas with magic powers? Her memory twanged like an overstretched rubber band as Conan remembered her original plan that she'd walked in here planning to get them to agree to. It hurt. I really have no idea what I'm doing. I didn't even figure out, until, yes. Hidan contemplated for a few seconds, then paused his contemplation. Closing his eyes firmly, he reached inside and allowed everything to vanish, losing focus until the feelings disappeared somewhere. Much better. Although it disrupted his ability to think and remember, he continued to allow himself to be capable of this. Then he resumed contemplating. If he'd been an analytic type, it wouldn't have taken any contemplating time at all since he really didn't have much to think about. Any requirements to join. Everyone in the room, formerly engrossed in their individual reactions to Conan's information, now turned to look at him. Their reactions varied through several shades of disbelief, wonder, pity, and a bunch of other things. Many, especially those who had thrown up some emergency denial as cover, became angry as they remembered Conan's proposal. What does she think she's asking, and who does she think she is to demand it? Even so, they waited for an answer. Conan was the only one in the room to not react very much to Hidan's question. She looked at him with her flat face on, not feeling anything that Hidan could detect, and replied. Requirements? Yeah, do we get a group uniform or anything? There was no change in Conan, although she did make an effort to move her face more as she spoke. What do you think I'm wearing? Gasp. Hidan's mouth fell open as he vividly pictured himself wearing a cloak similar to the one she wore. So badass. I would look so good in that. I would sell my soul for this opportunity. Without even needing to think about it, he followed up with, any special gear? At this a ripple of pain passed through her, and her flat face turned translucent, allowing some feeling to show through. With a look of sadness that reminded Nagato of why he and Yahiko had come, she spoke slowly. Your original had a special weapon, yes. As did Kisame. Your original wielded a scythe as tall or taller than himself, with 3 red blades. Kisami's used a special sword called the Samahata. Samahata was alive, cut enemies with large razor-sharp scales, and 8 chakra. Nobody else used any unique weapons as far as I know. The emergency shield of denial fractured into a glass mist instantly as Kisame froze. Samahata. How does this lady know about Samahata? Wait. Samahata's not a sword, but she knows Samahata's alive. Eats chakra. Kisami's right arm remembered the feeling of tooth marks in it. Fish. Shredded. Never eaten. Oh my god. His vision swam before him, rearranging itself into a scene crystal clear yet unfamiliar. She's telling the truth. Hidan made a series of warbling chirping, squeaking, squealing noises that rose up and down a full scale, conveying joy. He could not help bobbing his entire body up and down and shaking his fists held tightly in front of him as he did so. The pain lifted from Conan as she watched him, no longer reminded of his own original but of another, completely different man that she did not feel bad about in the slightest. That's so Toby-ish. He settled and, still giggling, turned to Kakuzu with eyes wide open and lit up like a bonfire. Waste of money my ass. Even if I didn't love that thing, it's still, I don't know. In your face. I get a badass cloak and the coolest weapon that's ever existed. Is this or is this not the greatest thing ever? Kakuzu stared at him in angry bafflement. You're going to do this. You're going to spend time with the disturbed lunatic who says we're all dead and everything we know is part of a multidimensional conspiracy to do who knows what just so you can get the chance to play ninja, pretend you can do magic, and dress up. He looked very pissed, and everyone in the room wondered if this was what Conan had been talking about when she said they could detect chakra disturbance. His voice continued rising in volume and lowering in pitch as he went on. All this just because you like the look of obvious insanity and apparently have a death wish. By now Kakuzu's voice had deepened too much for him to sustain any volume, so the next growl was little more than a whisper. You, Hidan, are the largest idiot I have ever had the misfortune of meeting. Hidan looked at him quizzically, scratching his head. Once again he could have been overwhelmed by it, his own feelings drowned in Kakuzu's anger. Fortunately, his own joy was great enough to counteract it. Kakuzu, he found a very nice spot near his ear to scratch at and did so until sufficiently poetic words flowed out. And the fortune too, right? Kakuzu narrowed his eyes and glared. Hidan grinned like a sunrise, a surprisingly sweet sight that he'd literally never presented to the world before. Kakuzu was surprised out of his anger for just a moment. A moment was all that Hidan needed. You wouldn't want to be bored, would ya? You wouldn't want to be only partial, would ya? You are, Kakuzu. You're partial. You'd never do anything except beat people at gambling, get angry sometimes, and sit there with your money if I wasn't around. That's still most of what you do even with me around, except since I am around, you can take occasional breaks from being just that shit. A light flashed somewhere. His smile dropped into a questioning look. Huh, I wonder if, maybe, other you was more complete, or at least if there's reasons why you don't do very much. I mean, why are you, what the hell are you, anyway? If we're supposed to be ninjas, and we've got all these ninja things, and we don't do anything with them, then, if these ninja things are us, or parts of us I mean, then we're, partial. Because, you know, those things are just gathering dust somewhere and they're missing. Hidan had started scratching as soon as the words ran out, but no more were coming. He looked around for inspiration. His eyes settled on Conan. I mean, just look at her. A lot of weirdness, yeah. But I bet she knows where the weirdness came from, and what the it does, and what she can use it for. You don't know any of that shit. What good are your stitches? Where did they come from? What are you really able to do? Where did you, your money fetish and stitches and like everything else, where'd you come from? I'd like to know. Not you. I wouldn't be able to know where you came from. Me. Like where'd my scythe come from, and all that shit. Hidan looked hopefully in Conan's direction. I wonder if I could maybe hang out with me someday. Would he be cool? Would we be different? How much have I been doing by myself in the past months, anyway? Wait. Ah shit, I confused myself. What's going on? While Hidan tried to piece together the tracks of his train of thought, which was a hopeless effort, many of them had been stolen even before the explosion, and the most recent disappeared down a yawning canyon. Everyone else except Conan felt a little ping inside. At what part? None could have said. Conan felt several parts of her freeze back over as she tried to answer the question. If you could, of course. Of course you would. I'm sure that a dedicated, loyal predator would be very cool. All at once the urge to just get everyone else away sprang up, against which she was powerless. Her hands tightened into fists. A direct line was established to her eyes, which flared. I will be in the front lobby. Any questions the others may have started to come up with were silenced at the scorching brand in her eyes. The air turned razor sharp and everyone was suddenly afraid to move. It returned to normal within the space of a second as she left, almost too quickly to track with the eye. Hidan abandoned his efforts and put his priorities back in order. In accordance with them, he raced out of the room not 2 seconds after her but turned in the opposite direction. Having explored the building thoroughly earlier, he raced to a room with a large enough window, opened it, jumped out, and took off into the woods. All this in just over 5 seconds. Yahiko and Nagato shared a look. She doesn't look like she likes this any more than we do. With a sympathetic look on Yahiko's face at the thought of her situation and a nod from Nagato, they understood what they had to do. Deidara snuck a look at the palms of his hands. How much of me does she understand? Maybe she can tell me about these two, huh? Sasori didn't tell me anything else, just that she looked ex-military, yeah. I never actually let him say anything else. Who the hell cares? It's Christmas, yeah, March 20th, actually, but Christmas anyway. Sasori had not the slightest idea what genre he was in. He decided to give up on finding out and just go with what he wanted to do. What do I want to do? He turned to his right and saw Deidara beginning to smile and looking at his hands, which were smiling too. Oh, of course. There was no choice to make after that. Itachi had often wondered about himself. Who and what am I? Where do I belong? There was no choice to make. Kisame was still frozen. She was right about Samahata. Everything she said. Wait, no. Classic fallacy. Just because she was right about Samahata doesn't mean she's right about everything else. Even so, The curiosity that had inspired him to stay in the first place sparked again. How much else is she right about? Kakuzu didn't have any idea what to think. Damn you, Hidan. More than anything else, he felt uncomfortable. Everything seemed to make perfect sense in his memory. All of it was internally consistent. And yet, when each part of it was tied to the present, it fell apart somehow. Like Hidan had pointed out earlier, the cause he remembered for his stitches didn't hold up compared to their current appearance. A lot of things didn't. Almost everything, actually. Everything suddenly seemed uncomfortable, not suited to him. I didn't need to hear anything she said. I didn't want to. Why did I even agree to this? The answer was quite simple. He'd agreed because Hidan had made him agree, because the little dipshit needed someone to look out for him. Stupid kid was going to get himself killed with a smile on his face before too much longer. Kakuzu had no idea how he'd even ended up in this position. He'd never made a decision to look after the kid beyond the first couple days. Yet somehow Hidan just kept showing up, forcing him into new and uncomfortable situations. Situations that Kakuzu refused to even think about, lest he inadvertently admit he enjoyed them. Without making a decision was made. Yahiko and Nagato went first. As they entered the lobby, Conan was sitting on the front desk staring out into the darkness beyond the large windows. Nagato wondered what she was keeping watch for. They stopped beside her, both struggling to think of what to say. They'd thought whatever had been bothering her earlier could be helped by their efforts, but with a low iron-like voice, she interrupted their considerations. Nagato, Yahiko, your originals specialized in jutsu, Nagato's in an impossibly wide variety, Yahiko in water style. I knew their techniques well. It would not be difficult to show you, if her posture softened, and both of them saw that she seemed to want them to join her. They shared a look. Yahiko was willing to do anything to help, and he didn't mind making friends along the way. It occurred to Nagato that this was the golden opportunity he had been looking for, handed to him on a silver platter. A way to stay near Yahiko as he wanted yet also forge other connections, distance himself as he also wanted. They turned back. So, see you, here. Will this be our place if anyone else joins? Yahiko asked. Conan considered. Eventually she said, cautiously, I'm not sure what you mean by our place. Of course you will be fully allowed to continue whatever lives you have, outside of the Akatsuki. Yeah, but we'd need facilities, right? Someplace to keep our ninja stuff, a training room, somewhere to meet. A group should be together, or it's not much of one. I guess here's a good place. He had a point. No such accommodations had been necessary before because all Akatsuki members were already elite ninjas by the time they joined, but these ones would all have to train together. She would not have to, of course. Not in the same way. Conan continued to studiously stare outside, away from them as she replied, sound reasoning. I'll mention it to anyone else who comes out this way. The pair looked back at each other, unsure, before deciding the best course of action was to leave. As they walked out to their car, Nagato started to turn the possibilities over in his head. He wouldn't have described anyone else in that room as bad looking, exactly, few of them were even kind of feminine looking, though, so that did limit his options, and that's if anyone was available. Yahiko asked what he was smiling about as they faced each over the car's roof. Nagato passed it off as just realizing how powerful Conan had implied his original to be. He continued to smile in secret all the way back. Sasori got impatient after a couple minutes and asked Deidara, are you going to stand here or are we gonna get moving? Deidara broke out into a grin and rushed from the room, trusting Sasori to come of his own accord this time. By the time he was within earshot, Deidara was already showing his palms to Conan, he never did that to anybody, not even Sasori, and asking about them. Conan replied that she had no idea where those came from, but they were not completely unique in her world and barely out of the ordinary in the Akatsuki. Deidara pulled his hands back with an excited grin that turned into a pained look of indecision as he tried to ask what he so strongly wanted to ask but couldn't figure out how. Sasori put a hand on his shoulder and pulled him away, murmuring gently, "Bug her later, brat." Neither noticed the grimace that crossed Conan's face before she explained to them Yahiko's reasons for taking this building as a base of operations. Itachi and Kisame watched the door swing shut before making their presences known. Tacitly, they agreed to not talk about their current activity until such time as it seemed normal. Conan made a comment about Itachi's eyes suggesting he should investigate them sometime, and asked Kisame if he did have Samahata in this world. Kisame didn't want to give her too much information yet, so he only replied, yes. She made sure to mention he could bring Samahata whenever he felt comfortable doing so, which was very courteous. Kisame allowed her to see his back fully turned as he left, wondering about how his first experience living with people not his parents would turn out. He wouldn't have agreed if not for having seen that there were enough rooms for everyone to sleep alone. Finally, Kakuzu emerged. He just stared at her, narrowed his eyes, grumbled and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was getting into. With a sigh, he asked her to please make sure Hidan didn't get any caffeine or sugar. She sensed he was not in the mood to hear her speak anymore, so she didn't. With everyone gone, the building was quiet. She wondered if Nagato and Yahiko felt this quiet, across the uncrossable space. She continued to sit there on the desk for some time after everyone had left. The lobby was dark, only her flower shone in the faint moonlight. It felt better to sit there unseen while she wondered what to do. Why am I here? The question was unavoidable. There was physical evidence that the ninjas she knew were not actually the ninjas she had known. So why was she there? Conan saw, in her mind's eye, another woman, like herself but not the same person, laughing with the strangers that called themselves Nagato and Yahiko as she had done in another world. That woman could have been perfectly happy with them, they could have all been complete. That woman would not have her terrible memories, would belong here. A terrible thought occurred to her. I exist, and she doesn't. Did I do something to keep another me from existing, to keep them from having her in their lives? Is it my fault somehow that Nagato doesn't have a sister, and Yahiko's still probably single? Did I do something to steal a chance at a second life for myself when I didn't deserve it? Would they have been happier with a me that fit with them? If what she had seen of Nagato's interactions with Yahiko before was any indication, the answer was yes. Perhaps there was a reason she had been saved back then. Actually seeing them alone together, just her two lifelong companions without her, seemed unbalanced. If I wasn't here, they could have had a suitable me to balance them. Conan wondered how the afterlife was, if there was any need for balance in heaven. Do my Nagato and Yahiko miss me? Did I do something to run away from them? Are they angry or disappointed? Conan shook her head, trying to dispel these thoughts. No, it's no use to think of what might have been. If I'm to prove competent enough to lead a new Akatsuki, I must look to the future, to what is and could be. So, there must be a reason I exist. Something that is here only because I am, that nothing and no one else could do. Was I brought over to this world with the intention that I would form a new Akatsuki? Is that my reason for existing? The idea was absurd. How could anything with the capacity to do this possibly care about something so small as a few humans? No. Perhaps it's more general than that. A subject of one world, in another. The yin in the yang. A bridge. Her death flashed before her eyes. Do I exist because of what I promised Toby, that I would be that bridge? A decision appeared. To accept, or not to accept. Half of it was missing a leg to stand on, so it fell over and disappeared. There's no reason not to accept that as my reason for being here. I suppose they would have just reinvented the techniques of my world anyway. It is so, then. I am here to bridge the gap between my world and this one. I know that I am, because I decided I was. Who's going to tell me otherwise? Not anyone I'd know well enough to listen to. Her fingers tightened and she hissed at the casual reference to the fact that everyone she knew and loved or at least cared about in the slightest was dead. Even Hidan. Especially Hidan. Before she even knew it, Conan had thrown herself off her perch and was moving at quick speed down the hallways of the building. Her legs propelled themselves, and the mechanisms of her mind swung away from everything she'd just been thinking about. It was a common reflex hammered into every ninja during missions. She immediately classified this as a reconnaissance mission and focused all her attention on the task of learning more about the building. First, the layout. The front lobby and its side rooms took up the entire front of the lower floor, and had two hallways leading from it on either side parallel to each other. The hallway they'd all used to access the kitchen through the propped open door was the hallway to the right, as one faced into the lobby from the front door. Conan moved down that hallway quickly, turned into the kitchen, crossed it, went through the other doorway, found herself in an adjoining room with nothing in it except a power outlet low to the floor on the left, turned right through a snugly fitted set of doors to exit that room, and found herself in a hallway. Turning to her right, she walked around the corner and found the kitchen's doorway. She turned back and crossed the hallway entirely, turning left when it ended, and the lobby reappeared. So, the lobby and the cross hallway appeared to form a rectangle, with the kitchen and small room going through the intervening space. On each side of this rectangle she'd seen one room, seemingly not used for guests. The guest rooms were probably the ones beginning at the two far corners of the rectangle and continuing down the building. She went back down the left hallway, noting several rooms on this side. It was long and ended abruptly, turning right into another cross hallway. In the middle of this one stood a set of stairs, and behind the stairs a back door leading onto a small stoop covered with bird poop. She continued through the cross hallway until reaching the other side, which had instead of a room at the very end a sunken stairway leading down to the left. Conan was intrigued and descended, finding a small door at the bottom in the left side of the wall. She opened it to discover a large open space. The ceiling was low, but the area was vast and obviously took up the entire space underneath the cross hallway. The floor was metal. Conan dismissed the obvious thought immediately. The room had probably been used for storage once and could be used as such again. There was no reason to have to torture anyone in this world anyway. Well, as far as she knew there wasn't, not yet. It would be really easy to clean in a pinch. Being right beneath the rest of the building would pose a problem, but as she looked around the soundproofing possibilities began to appear before her eyes. Conan shook her head, cleared these thoughts away for later, and returned to the ground floor. Again she traced her steps in the direction of the front of the building. It seemed to appear after only a few steps in that direction. Every other room had been neatly closed or at most just open enough to peek into. This one was wide open, which Conan saw as she approached by the amount of light spilling into the hallway from it. This amount wavered a little as the door moved back and forth in the air, movements coming from the open window. Conan stopped, looked and listened all around, sensing nothing. There was nothing outside the window but the forest. The forest, she recalled Hidan racing out of the room just behind her, turning in this direction. She moved inside and reached out for the window. Just before she could, it occurred to her to wonder why she would close the window. Her hand tightened around the window's handle, prepared to pull it down at the slightest sound of movement. Again she wondered why. He did not pose a threat to her. My Hidan wouldn't. But who is this guy? Even so, she could not really believe he was any danger to her rational self. I couldn't tell any difference before. She left, leaving the window gaping open behind her. This hallway led back to the kitchen door in the lobby, as expected. A giant rectangle with a line splitting it in two across the middle. There was an upper floor, but the reconnaissance mission was over. She wandered into the kitchen and sat on top of the little counters, spent. Today had been too full. She felt almost as drained as she had after Yahiko died, but a different kind of drained. That had been overbearing loss. This was every kind of feeling mixed together. The happiness, the sadness, the sudden loss. It only made her slightly nauseous to wonder whether it really mattered that they weren't the people she knew, as long as they worked well enough as replacements. Of course, it was obvious the answer was yes, but she turned it over in her head slowly anyway. Conan knew in a detached kind of way that she would wake up in the morning in hell. Some slight disgust passed through her as she felt herself shrink away from the thought of seeing them again. What the hell was that about? Yes, it hurt to think of them, especially the ones that looked just like her two most treasured people in the entire world. But she was a warrior. She'd seen Yahiko die once already. How could seeing him alive possibly feel so bad that she'd shrink away from it? Actually, nothing about what she felt upon seeing him alive made any sense. Even before, when she'd thought he was her Yahiko, it had felt bad. Conan thought about the scene at the park. She hadn't been able to look at him. Even now, she tried to picture his face, and couldn't. Her mind flinched away from that image. With a sinking heart, she realized she could not look at him and would not be able to do so anytime soon. Why? She loved him. It didn't make any sense. She considered her options. Even if she in no way had the energy to sort out her feelings tonight, her first instinct was to come up with a plan to do so. No matter what she felt, it was her duty as a shinobi to do what she'd promised and train them. She couldn't do that without looking at them. The thought of being in such close quarters, training together again, made her twitch. Conan groaned under her breath. I can't do this. I'm trying to make a plan to solve a problem that is itself disrupting my ability to plan and, I suspect, is immune to rational thought. I can't do this. I don't have the slightest clue how. Yes, she was aware such thinking would lower her chances further. No, she didn't give two damns about that at this time. Frustration seethed under her skin. While the burst of angry motivation was just starting to make its way through her arteries, the moon continued to shine softly on the forest, bathing everything in its silver glow. The winds moved slowly, almost wrapping themselves around the living things in the woods like a hug. Hidan raced along, moving as silently as he could, surging through the night. He did not have the breath to waste purring, but he was certainly in the mood for doing so. Some funny thoughts were racing through his head, but funny in a kind of good way. Home, family, maybe, the future. Hidan wondered if he'd ever had any of those things. Of course he must have had a home and family at some point. As he ran alongside the wall and carefully oriented himself so the blades on his back wouldn't catch the side of the window, Hidan wondered if his parents looked like him and would recognize him if they could see him now. Easily, he hopped into the air, twisted just the right amount, and threw his arms under and behind him to propel himself forward. That part was easy. The hard part was the landing. Certain muscles pushed as he crossed through the window to swing his body to the side. As his body failed to turn enough, Hidan panicked and pulled his legs forward just in time to land on the very front of his feet and continue falling forward. His arms were more accurate in their timing, so he landed hard on his forearms and continued forward, stopping only when he reached out with his left hand and pushed back against the floor in front of him. His nose was mere inches from the carpeted floor. Hidan whined despite there being nobody to hear his complaint, and pushed himself off the ground. No matter how much he practiced these movements, his instincts always accounted for a tail he didn't have. He continued to grouse before it occurred to him that maybe his scythe could help with that. He stopped brushing off immediately and popped out of the room, purring eagerly. The purr changed to a thick rumble, then died as his steps slowed. Leaving the room and entering the hallway, the tracks of Conan's path just a few minutes prior lingered. Hidan found himself reflexively reaching for the handle of his favorite weapon, pulling it closer, as if that would soothe anything. His other hand curled, and he came up with a really good idea for one of the training rooms on the spot. But this time, the suddenness of this feeling left no doubt. Hidan shook his head, pushed it away. When stuff came up out of nowhere like this with no obvious cause, it was definitely someone else's feelings. He remembered the look on Conan's face, the sudden change in the air as she told them they looked like all her dead friends, and felt very stupid. Following the trail, he raced to the front of the building. The lobby was in darkness, as it had been ever since she first raced out of the room and left them to their thoughts. Hidan would have preferred the warm light of the sun himself, but at this moment he understood perfectly her perspective. The darkness was better for being alone. He slowly, carefully stepped out onto the lobby floor and made his way to the desk she was standing in front of. He stopped a little behind and to her left, and considered what to say. Even for someone like him, this was still a guessing game. He tried his best to see how her feelings felt, but the only things they left him wanting was a room full of punching bags to beat mercilessly. A shiver shimmered up his spine, and something seemed to slip. A feeling of panic that was all his own rushed through Hidan's veins. He recognized this vague sense of being off-kilter, unstable. It was a terribly dangerous thing to be, and everyone he'd ever felt it from had had an uncontrollable situation that someone always had to step into control. Family if they were lucky, cops if they were less lucky, a judge ordering them to a psychiatric stay if they were super in over their heads. Sometimes, in the best of cases, it had been him. The desire not to let her be alone took him, and Hidan understood exactly what he needed to do. Want a hug? Conan felt something twist inside. Her first thought was that no way in hell could she do that. Touching him, wrapping her arms around him, letting him hold her in a close manner, something in that felt like it would be wrong somehow. He's not my Hidan. He's another person who just happens to look and sound a lot like him. He's like my Hidan's twin brother. I can't just skip from man to man like that, as if he was interchangeable. Hidan is just like Yahiko in how unique he is. That would be betrayal. No, it wouldn't. He'd understand perfectly if he was able to. Actually, this difference in semantics was her rational mind speaking. Conan, after running through a great deal of thought, realized that she was going about this entirely the wrong way. Her rational mind was entirely helpless. It was no good to appeal to it. For now, as long as it felt like betrayal, it was. I've never thought of it like that. I've never decided my own reality like that. I don't know how to think in this way. Fortunately, someone did, and he was standing right there waiting for her. Conan turned and looked him in the eyes. He looked faintly worried at first glance, but grinned before she finished turning. He wondered how much directness she was used to, then decided, screw it. He was a direct person, she'd have had to get used to that before, so onward. He reached out his arms and held them there, an invitation to step into them should she decide yes. Conan hesitated. It still seemed wrong, but looking in his eyes, there appeared nothing but a desire to make her feel better. Why is that look there? Sometimes, when I've done something for him, Hidan has offered assistance in return because he sees me as being like himself. But this Hidan is nothing like me. Why? She had no idea. All she knew was that stepping into his arms right now would be something very significant. A show of trust. Did she trust him? Hidan's arms were starting to feel it after a couple seconds being held out like that. He knew he'd feel so much worse, maybe up to triple Terry bad levels even, if he left himself and her to such feelings. He didn't have the slightest clue what he was defending himself from, except that it was awful, and a hug helped with awful feelings no matter what they were, right? So he kept his arms up despite their burning. Conan wondered how long he was going to keep this up, and why. Then she realized she was very stupid. He trusts me. He's inherently unreasonable enough to do that. My whole plan depended on him trusting me. Why did it take me so long to think of that? Such faith couldn't go unrepaid. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The world dropped out from under her. As soon as her fingers made skin-to-skin contact, she felt it. Without any knowledge or feeling, her knees went limp and he held her up. Conan's perception was far away from such small concerns. Her perception was that the world had turned liquid, no, more insubstantial than liquid, and was now in action everywhere, and she was in serious danger of being swallowed up and dissolved. With no small horror and amazement, she realized Hidan was hollow. Since first contact, his skin and muscle, all that seemed solid in him, had first become as thin as the membrane surrounding an apple, then disappeared entirely. All she could perceive now was that she was in contact with a portion of the liquid reality that hurt, and was on the edge of falling into it. Suspended over the abyss, she could imagine her entire being separated into its constituent motes, never to be reunited again, and said being became almost entirely composed of fear. Almost. Even as she feared falling in, she knew she could not. Somehow, though she couldn't feel it, Conan's being was still attached to her body somewhere, and her body could not pass through Hidan's. Her being could not truly merge with this substance of reality. This inability was not absolute, however. Some things can escape beyond a single person's being even while confined to a physical body. Parts of one's personality and identity cannot, but emotions easily can. So it was that before her perception, the substance of reality that she could only barely stay separate from reclaimed the parts of itself that were in her. The pain of loss, of deprivation, that dull ache that pounded through her entire body and fatigued her was first transmuted, then withdrawn. From a dull ache which tired her and felt uneven and dirty, it became a sharp flash of stabbing, cutting pain, a clean form of pain that drew all impurities out and filled her with energy. The only impurities it drew out this time were itself, the impossible deep blue that was not blue. It was every other color at once actually, but mostly blue. Most of the colors it consisted of she had no possible name for. All she could name was a deep bluish color that felt like stabbing and splitting and falling, and had once made her feel afraid. As soon as the pain was purified, she had stopped feeling fear. Now it seemed, above all else, clean. She wanted to fall into it, become precise, defined and clean like it was. Still her body held her back. It was awful, terribly awful. Tears filled her eyes, and her arms tightened around Hidan's broad shoulders. Hidan's arms tightened too, but his eyes stayed unfocused straight ahead. He had felt the fear, of course, as well as the what? Something sinking down, incorporated and washed away into him. He wondered what that feeling had been. The feeling that, had something important happened? She'd been afraid, he remembered. Had anything else happened? No, nothing that was in his recollection. No other feelings. He smiled and rubbed her back comfortingly, wondering what she'd been afraid of. It withdrew. The pain that filled all of reality, that gave life, that made things right that were wrong, it hid itself again. Conan was able to wrestle her emotions back under control, and found herself pressed up against Hidan's muscular shoulder while he rubbed circles in her back. Rubbing circles like that seemed so Hidan somehow, so much like the I heard upset people like this, let's try it out form she'd always imagined any attempt of his to be kind would take. It was utterly soothing, and intolerable. But this time, even though it was for the same reason, it being intolerable didn't hurt in the same terrible way. She marveled at this as she stepped back. Hidan melted with relief, and almost fell forward as the burden was lifted from his shoulders. Now that he didn't have to use his energy to keep her feelings from overwhelming him, his eyelids began to send signals warning him of what time it was. It was really too bad. He would have liked to nuzzle her more, watch her smile like she was now for a while, but he actually did have questions to be asked. With a sigh, he reached back and grabbed the scythe, stepping back to sit on the desk as he did so in order to lay it across his lap. Conan stayed where she was, looking at him intently and with no desire to turn away. I have some questions about everything, he said. This was no surprise, and Conan waited patiently for him to settle on what to ask first. Where did this thing come from? Conan blinked in surprise. Then it dawned on her that of course, after what Hidan had said earlier, it followed that he would be most interested in his original's past. The one group of topics she didn't know anything about. I don't know. Perhaps I should warn you, the original Akatsuki was not a group of friends, as you seem to be. I knew them only as far as I worked with them. I would have liked to know your original more, but fraternizing that much would have been highly unusual and suspicious, so I did not. I can't tell you anything of his past. Hidan had looked at her expectantly while she answered as if he had a list organized and ready to run through, a guess confirmed by the way he muttered, "Oh. Crap," and furrowed his eyebrows. After only a few seconds, he got a lightbulb expression on his face and asked, "But wait, that means you know how he fought and stuff, right? His techniques. What kind of cool ninja shit did he do?" "Oh, this poor guy." Her face slipped and revealed the oncoming disappointment. Hidan's expression changed from eager lightbulb to ha. As he looked, Conan rearranged her face quickly and proceeded. "I'm sorry, but not a lot. There were only two notable characteristics of your original. The first was his immortality. He could take any amount of damage that didn't destroy his body on the cellular level and survive it. Given how he didn't bother defending himself most of the time, I believe he healed more efficiently and faster to compensate. As far as actual techniques, though, he only had one that I know of." Hidan's eyes were doing something strange. They were widening in an odd way that made her feel very, very bad for telling him this. His lips joined the act, too, and Conan fought not to cringe. "The reason your scythe has 3 blades is to increase its attack span. It's not meant to kill the enemy itself, although it can easily do that if you hit the right place, but your original only used it to gather blood from the enemy. He had a ritual, used in battle as part of his religion. It was some kind of human sacrifice ritual, and he considered it disrespectful to his god not to use it, so that was the only technique he fought with. He had to get some of the enemy's blood, stab himself and draw a design on the ground with his own blood. When he ingested the enemy's blood and stood in the design, his body would change color to show it was connected with the enemy's body. As long as he stood in the design, anything that was inflicted on him would be inflicted on his target as well." Conan paused to catch a breath and gauge Hidan's reaction, which had paused at the stage it was at before. His eyes changed slightly, keeping their unusual guilt-tripping qualities but with a look of added bewilderment in them, like she was doing something to him and he couldn't understand what he had done to deserve it. She was used to taking care of minor nuisances Nagato did not wish to bring out another path for, but something in this particular man's expression touched her in a way screams had not for some time. Her voice softened to a near whisper for the final devastating news. "I'm afraid, the limitations are as bad as they sound." Conan swallowed. This only worked as long as he stayed in the circle, which meant that his greatest physical attribute, his mobility, was rendered useless. In the time it took to draw the circle and stab himself fatally, an enemy could easily force him out of it. The technique either only worked on one enemy at a time, or he simply never bothered to use it on more than one, but either way only one target could be killed using this technique. If he wanted to kill more than one, it would require leaving, fighting to get more blood, and returning to the circle all over again. He had to have backup for every battle if there was a chance of there being more than one enemy, and the technique would fail if an enemy got the chance to see it in live. Backup is the only reason he survived using such a technique, because his immortality could easily be defeated by an enemy forcing him out of the circle and immobilizing him, such as by cutting off his head. In fact, that's how he died. He wasn't supposed to ever die. The shock from months ago came over her, and Conan was rendered speechless once again. No, the possibility that he could be immobilized is right there, easily deducible, plain as day. The idea that he couldn't was one that I should never have entertained. I was stupid, blinded by lust and whatever kind of connection I may have begun to think we had. Just because a man is handsome, has the protection and guidance of a literal god, and seems more than normal doesn't mean the universe is obligated to protect him. There's no special armor awarded to those who are special. I must never forget that again. I'm not sure how I did forget that, again. She bowed her head in an instinctive show of respect to the dead, regardless if they could see her or not. His abilities also included the standard ones that every shinobi learns from their general education, the ability to handle ninja tools, kunai, and shuriken, some moderate skill in hand-to-hand combat, some low-level jutsus. If you have inherited any capacity to be a shinobi, you should have those skills as muscle memory. Once more she faced him, looked into his eyes. Any questions? Hidan stared back, the guilt trip gone but the bewilderment remaining. Slowly he blinked, and looked down. His mouth moved as he considered what to say. His hands tightened around the stem of the scythe just below its lowest blade, and he lifted it, held the blades in front of his face. So, this is all I have. Conan reminded him softly, and the ritual, and immortality. Hidan shook his head. Immortality, yeah, but no battle techniques. No actual impressive unique things, except something I can't use. I can get stabbed, and I can use a slightly different weapon slightly better than some Rondo could. That's all I get from my original. That bastard. Conan frowned. The ritual isn't completely unusable. Hidan looked up sharply at her. Yeah, it well is. It's a thing that requires me to be there close to the person I'd use it on, gives them enough time and enough warning of how totally screwed they are to let all the dread and fear and shit settle in, and makes me feel the same as they feel. That is completely and utterly, totally, unusable. I'd drive myself insane if I used that. I couldn't use it for anything except killing someone, so every time I used it I'd have to feel all the fear and pain of dying. Yeah, I don't like feeling that shit. I can't use it at all. It'd make me lose my mind. How in the could? He continued on in an almost uninterrupted string of curses for some time, but Conan stopped paying attention and continued to process the beginning of what he'd said. He does feel the pain, but he enjoys that usually because he's a masochist. But he mentioned fear as well. The ritual doesn't make Hidan feel the same emotions as his victims. He's never described feeling fear before. I didn't say anything to imply it did, I only said his body would become linked to their body. I only described physical linkage. Why on earth would he think? Hidan, she interrupted. He looked up with an angry look on his face, presumably at his unhelpful bastard of an original. Conan stared at him and found the inner blaze surging of its own accord behind her eyes as she focused intently. The look dropped and his mouth fell open a little, but all she was focused on was his eyes. His eyes near instantly assumed the focus of a predator, even as they widened in awe. The result was a combination of both. The space between them seemed to vibrate as they both looked with intense focus at each other, and only each other. This time, there was no other business to get in the way. Hidan, how did you know my intentions were trustworthy? She demanded. For someone else, he might not have, but for her he obeyed. You felt trustworthy. With you there, I didn't feel any mocking like, hee, suckers, I didn't feel any anger or desire to hurt, I didn't feel anything except closeness. If you had been untrustworthy, you would have brought in trustworthy feelings and shit with you. I didn't. So, I knew you were okay. The intense focus and burning disappeared from Conan's eyes as she retreated into her own thoughts, though she continued to look into him. Itachi. Hidan lowered his gaze and started scratching his head, feeling suddenly sheepish. They're different people, not the people I knew. Hidan stopped scratching and looked up. The space between them that had seemed so close before now seemed like a cold, uncrossable void. Hidan's arms prickled with goosebumps. But, didn't they seem to have the same abilities? Why? Conan returned to the room, which now seemed much more empty than it was before. She could feel the empty space around them, somehow, as well as the silence. Hidan looked at her, looking just as confused as she was. But he wouldn't he? The exact words Itachi had used before came back, and she did something she'd never done before. She blushed and facepalmed. Hidan felt the ripple of an urge to laugh pass through him, then it was gone. Conan lowered her hand to her side, and the very slight redness she had been able to allow to her cheeks disappeared. My apologies. Immortality was the only special ability he had, but like everyone else my Hidan had some quirks. One of those was unusually accurate perception. He could see things in other people that were not immediately obvious, almost at a glance. He saw some things I'd rather not mention in me, and sometimes made comments about Kakuzu or others that seemed reasonably true, but only if you had certain information that he was never given. She peered closer at the version of Hidan sitting before her. Unlike you, however, this only worked if he was bothering to pay attention or whatever he saw was interesting enough to grab him. The range of things he could perceive was limited, as well. Kakuzu found it very helpful how often he might be asked to take a close look at an enemy and deduce nothing more specific than, "What the is wrong with that guy?" Or something similarly unhelpful. A great many things he couldn't see, couldn't identify in specific language, or ignored as unimportant. And all he did was see things in other people, not feel them as you claim to. I'm intrigued now about what has happened to change you. As well as why you have to be so different from my Hidan, and who the hell are you, and is anybody else also different from their originals? Let's not forget I might just have to throw out all my conclusions about this world and guess all over again, and most of my privacy will have to go in the trash as well. Hidan was feeling very grumpy. He could be quite sure that wasn't anything he was picking up from her, because she didn't look at all grumpy, and she also wasn't the target of vague disappointing vibes, didn't seem tired, and wasn't acting like she felt at all uncomfortable. Not to mention that he had no idea how to feel about the idea that at least part of his having to be constantly swayed in various directions by other people might be because of his stupid original, and even if future him decided that was a good thing, his original would still be a jackass. Alright, it was time to shut business down for the day and hit the carpet. He sighed, sat up, and grumpily asked, "Can I use this thing as a substitute tail?" Conan followed his gesture to the red scythe in his lap. "You may try and tell me if it works." "Cool beans. Let's make a deal. Since I could feel you earlier having all kinds of problems with all your friends being dead and all, let's shake on it. Let's shake on us being, like, new friends for ya. We're new people, so that makes us new friends. Would that be good?" he asked, holding out a hand. Conan looked at his hand and thought of Yahiko's smile. "I will not be able to hold up my end of that bargain. Sigh, you'll have to get used to us eventually. I wonder how long it'll take me to get used to having no privacy whatsoever. Nagato didn't use his jutsu to monitor all my activities, after all." She still did not think it would be possible to not think of her versions of them, and said as much. Hidan said nothing, just stared back with visible effort taken to keep his eyelids open, until she relented. Even while tired, his hand closed firmly around hers, promising. "That room with the carpet and the huge window that I used earlier looks good. I'll probably sleep in after all this staying up past my bedtime, so if Kakuzu asks you can tell him where to avoid going. Yawn, happy dream hunting." Conan smiled, and it took no effort. "To you as well." Hidan hopped off the desk, gave her a thumbs up, and turned in the direction of his room. Conan realized she was very glad he'd decided to go to bed, and selected her own room in her mind. She did not feel remotely as tense and uncomfortable as before, it seemed like she would get a good night's sleep. Knowing he would be able to hear her, she followed Hidan's scythe-laden back as he left the room.